You know how we do. Shout out to be out there, Orlando. You know how we do. WilD 98.7. That's my home too.
Team Fetty got me crawling out the radio.
Shh, that's Buddy from the Freak Show.
Big boss man, I'm the capo. Tom say I need this no cap. Oh, celebrate it.
Yeah.
Plus hate it.
Yeah.
The reason DJ Shorty ain't made it. 20 years.
May it please the court. My name is Kieran Keith Jackman. I represent Erik Mishev, the appellant in this case.
Mr. Jackson, some housekeeping order matters. We received your notice of appearance. We received a notice of supplemental authority. Something came across my desk this morning, which is apparently an affidavit of a Erik Green, which is dated more than a month after the final judgment on appeal. So what is it, if anything, you want us to do with that?
Your Honor, I believe at the time he was represented, and he may have filed it, he believed that he filed it, but it's referenced to in the complaint.
Was that before the trial court?
It was not before the trial court.
I'm not going to listen to
So
it.
you cannot listen to it, but it is referenced to in the complaint.
You don't have minutes for rebuttal, Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, I will have five minutes. In the trial court below and in the briefs, defendants err, as well as the court, by stating that statements are protected under the SLAPP statute simply because it is a part of a broadcast. Rather, for a statement to be protected, the statement must be protected by the First Amendment or the applicable law in connection with the radio broadcast. But the key thing here is the statute only prohibits a suit that is without merit and primarily brought because the defendant has exercised their constitutional right to free speech or protected speech.
But if I read the statute, the introduction to it presupposes that the statement would otherwise be protected.
Yes.
Okay.
But as this court has stated in Baskin, that it says that the legislature has tied protection to the anti-SLAPP statute to speech protected by the First Amendment of the United States, and that doesn't reach to true threats, fraud, defamation. Those things aren't protected speech. And what we have here is allegations. We have a complaint that alleges with specificity lots of things. That he was an illicit drug user. They disparaged his livelihood. They communicated.
Well, can I ask you a question? The trial court made a conclusion that those sorts of statements were fair game in the broadcast industry. And indeed, my recollection is your client made a similar allegation against Mr. Davis.
That's
So
not.
Is that
That's not.
competent substantial evidence? Is nothing more than banter?
No, Your Honor. And the reason why it's not banter, one, we have no evidence. The complaint doesn't allege that the appellant made any kinds of statement like that. There's no affidavit from the other side indicating that there was a back and forth banter. He had no platform by which he was going back and forth. I think there was actually a case referenced in the brief or in the order that indicates something like the Trump case. In that case, it was more of, you had the plaintiff who appeared on a show and made statements about the then candidate Trump. And then in response, he went onto Twitter and made statements about the plaintiff in that case. We don't have this in this case. We have someone that has been pretty much minding their own business. And what we have is a complaint that alleges that there was a sustained campaign to interfere with his ability to contract. It's not brought primarily because of any kind of protected speech, but it is brought because the client has been able to continue with his livelihood. It's been destroyed. He's been essentially sabotaged. He's been short-circuited due to this ongoing campaign. And when we look at a complaint, we should look at the four corners and also look at it in light of the plaintiff and draw reasonable inferences from it. So when we have allegations over a 20-year period, something that started back in 2002 and continuously, even though some of those things are outside the statute of limitation.
Well, isn't one of the primary allegations of being a drug user, isn't that well beyond the statute of limitations?
No, actually, it is not. On page 162 in paragraph 81, that was alleged as well in November 2020. This thing is a repeated, ongoing.
Well, the 2020 incident, I guess that involves Mr. Green.
Yes.
But it is alleged in the complaint.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's alleged in the complaint, and this happened within the statute of limitations.
There were also statements in December of 2019, weren't there?
Yes. Also that he was violating copyright law. That's actually defamation. I'm not sure if the appellant realizes that, but
But this is all in a broadcast.
it's not all, the complaint doesn't allege that. The court, I think, in error, just lumps it all and says it's just part of a broadcast. But even if it is part of a broadcast, that's not enough to make it protected. I mean, if we look at the Baskin case and we look at the reference to that case talking about the movie and the play, even though the case that it references, and forgive me, and I made my appearance not too long ago, so being familiar with the case is just, I guess it's in the Random House case, right? Even though that case was about whether or not they were media defendants, what we can glean from the statute and the media defendants is that defamation, as stated before, in that same case, defamation is actionable. It is something actionable. The reason why you give notice is to allow them to mitigate or to make a retraction. If just being part of a broadcast immunizes you, there would be no need for any kind of notice because you would be already immunized. So I think that's where I think the court makes an error. I think that's where the error is in the answer brief and so on, is that just because it's on a broadcast, although we're saying it's not part of a broadcast, just because it's on a broadcast, it is therefore protected speech. And
Well, then, I guess when I read through the complaint, what I see is a couple of references to broadcast. And then there seems to be this story that there's all this other stuff outside of a broadcast to try to derail your client's livelihood.
Exactly. So for the broadcast that you may be referring to is that, the post where Mr. Davis says, I'm the reason why he ain't made it in 20 years. I think what that shows
But that's certainly not defamatory, is it?
Exactly. It is not defamatory. But what it shows is that this is not brought primarily because of speech, and it also demonstrates that we have a campaign similar to the case in Beard, in Beard versus the classical, the case that I just filed against Mason Classical Academy. What we had here was a sustained campaign over 4 months, and that involved public and private conduct. And we're saying that this complaint is similar to that, except it's over a 20-year period. So there's some similarity there in the sense that it's not all protected. So just because some of the speech may have been, and again, I'm the reason why he made it, is not defamatory, but it goes to some of his other complaints, such as interference. And then it also goes to, there's also allegations in the complaint to battery. I think the court erred when it just took the single action rule and then lumped everything into there and ignored the non-defamatory statements, for instance, with the battery. And
I'm curious, it's interesting that the court granted a dismissal with prejudice.
exactly.
The court did not give an opportunity for your client to amend, to try to, if the court's concerned that maybe the focus was on one aspect versus some others, the court did not give an opportunity for the client to try to amend that?
Exactly, Your Honor.
You
And
have I guess you had the original complaint, and you had the first amended complaint, so those are the only,
that was
that's the only pleadings from your client.
exactly. That's the only pleading from it. And the First Amendment was due to this court's decision in the prior case. So for instance, the allegations are that in April 2020, Davis came to an establishment. Now, he uses language like, stalked him, followed him, was waiting him, and indicated that he would slap the excrement out of his Jewish hindquarters, not in those exact words, but in a profane way. That's page 161, paragraph 66 through 78, and it's corroborated by text messages. So this again shows that, hey, look, even if you look at this as speech, there is merit to it.
Good.
Mr. Jackson, I think maybe that might be pertinent to a showing of actual malice,
Yes.
but is Mr. Mashev arguing that he was a public figure or a private figure? I'm not sure.
He's saying that he's a private figure.
Is that inconsistent with sort of the premise of this whole suit, that he's got this huge following and this is preventing him from making it even bigger, and he's this big radio personality and now all these people don't want to work with him? I'm not sure, how do you sort of reconcile those two concepts?
I guess I want to quote a case, and it's about a lawyer who was very popular. It was on a very, a case that was in the news, but he was still held to be a private individual. So, he doesn't hold himself out. It's his profession. But, the fact that you have a following doesn't necessarily make you a public figure. He doesn't hold any office. He does not, go on shows regularly or anything like that.
But he's trying, right?
Well, he may be.
Isn't that the whole point of this?
Well, even if he is a public figure, we have the actual malice. We have, I'm the reason why he hasn't made it. It shows that Davis and Beasley were set out to injure him. So even if you look at him as a public figure, this complaint still withstands the test because of the motive that's demonstrated, this ongoing campaign, and so on and so forth. And there's nothing alleged or any kind of affidavits from the other side that says that my client held himself out to be in the public, that he was on a platform, going back and forth, or anything like that within the statute of limitations or even outside the statute of limitations. The interference as well. He also made allegations about using where Beasley Media used his trademark. I would say that's conversion and trespass to chattel. That's
I'm sorry,
okay.
I didn't hear you say that. Converted to what?
His trademark.
Okay.
Because they applied for his trademark when they knew that DJ Shorty was his trademark. So they, Beasley signed off on it, and that's on page 53, paragraph 23. I would say that's conversion. That's a 4-year claim, or trespass to chattel using property. Also communicating to YouTube and telling them that he was violating the copyright. That also violates statute. It could be a felony in Florida if you use a copyright and you violate it. I mean, it depends on the value.
Alleging that all of these allegations that he set forth in the complaint gives enough to show malice by the other side, by virtue of the other side's conduct in doing this, in doing that. So even if he is held to be a public figure, you're indicating that based on this complaint itself, it does show based on the allegations that this is actual malice and that the court was premature to try to dismiss it with prejudice.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, the trial court never got to that point, right? It strikes me that the trial court lumped everything into a single defamation claim
Yes.
without parsing out the different allegations made by your client.
Correct. Correct. I mean, even the order acknowledges, some of the things like in November 2020, Allie, that girl, Allison Gordon, a former Beasley employee, witnessed a course of conduct undertaken by Davis to actually destroy him. Again, even the battery, the fact that it was lumped in all as defamation under the single action rule, the battery in and of itself, you had Mr. Davis, we had the words. I understand that the answer brief says words alone, but he had the capability, and in fact, he alleged that security broke it up. So if security intervened, my client has alleged enough that he had the apprehension of an immediate being slapped, because that's exactly the words that Mr. Davis used. Also, I want to touch on the idea that because it's on, social media, and the fact that he works at a media company sort of immunizes him. These were, just like in Beard, these were his personal emails. I should say social media accounts like Twitter, Facebook, that's what his personal, it was not the station's. And even if we look at it, although we don't have any evidence from the other side, Beasley Media, is that a media defendant? I'm not sure that the court even reached that. So I think, the court was premature, didn't really go through the analysis of determining, how the speech was protected. It just said it was protected.
Mr. Jackson, you're into your rebuttal time.
Okay, I will wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. We'll have 5 minutes for you on rebuttal.
May it please the court, my name is Allison Lovelady, and I represent the appellees, Beasley Media and Mr. Orlando Davis in this case.
Can I get started with, I am concerned that your client takes a rather aggressive interpretation of the slap statute and seems to be saying anything they say on the radio immunizes them for anything.
I understand your concern, Your Honor. I don't believe that's the case here. In fact, what we have, as you know, this case previously came up on an interlocutory appeal, and this court indicated that the trial court needs to follow the anti-slap burden shifting statute. So in so doing, the trial court first looked at, does the anti-slap apply? And doing that, they looked at, the trial court looked at exactly what was alleged in the case. So we have here, the statute prohibits free speech in connection with public issues, including in connection with a play.
You got to start with the beginning of the statute. Speech that is otherwise protected.
Correct.
It seems that your client has ignored that first part of the statute and is relying only on the fact that it's made in a radio broadcast.
I don't think so, Your Honor. I respectfully disagree, because the statements are protected and that they are opinion. And so
That somebody's a cocaine user, it's an opinion.
So we have a number of statements at issue, Your Honor. And so the statement about,
That's true, and the two paragraphs that trouble me in particular of the complaint are paragraphs 24 and 81, both of which assert statements made during within the limitations period, that Mr. Masheyev was a cocaine user. So I'd like you to talk about those a bit, because I find those particularly troubling.
so we have the statement in 2019, which I think Your Honor previously brought up with my opposing counsel here about that he was using copyrighted material in the culture vulture statement. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, here, I'm focusing more on the illicit drug use aspect of that they contacted YouTube, Google directly and made all these assertions about this guy, including that he is an illicit drug user. And then just a year later, apparently made another statement referring to him as being a cocaine user.
So the first statement, I'll take them each in turn. The first statement that Your Honor is honing in on, paragraph 24, alleged that someone contacted YouTube without specificity, which is required for defamatory statements, and says that someone contacted YouTube and therefore said he was using copyrighted material. The exact statements are not alleged. There's also a general comment that said that he had used drugs. It doesn't say specifically what the statement is about him using drugs. That's the first statement. So that statement's actually in 2019. That's not alleged in the original complaint. That's alleged in the first amended complaint.
Which is the operative complaint, right?
Correct, and actually that is time barred because the First Amendment complaint is September 2022, and that was made in 2019. So as far as statements that were not brought, those are time barred for any statement that's September 2020 and earlier. So that statement is our contention that it was barred by the statute of limitations, and it's not defamatory. One, because it's very vaguely pled. We don't actually know the context or what was said or whom said what.
And why didn't you file, instead of dismissing it with prejudice, and it's, the judge made a comment that, in her view, it could never be alleged, and there's nothing in here. Typically, when you dismiss a case with prejudice, before you get to that point, you give an opportunity to amend, and if you keep saying it's lacking specificity, I said, well, give them an opportunity to amend, to lay all of that versus dismissal outright with prejudice.
So here, amendment would not be appropriate, and that's our position because he's already had an opportunity to amend and did amend once after the
Which is
interlocutory.
once, right?
He did. Now
And
is
we've
the
seen cases where 5 amended complaints, 6 amended complaints, and then the judge would dismiss with prejudice, and we reverse saying you need to give them an opportunity if they're able to allege. So the fact that he tried to amend it once, to give him an opportunity to especially say this is missing facts, and the court, even in the order, there's a little footnote that said that, and almost like a generalized conclusion, and he can never allege those facts. And that troubled me how the court jumped into that conclusion without any evidence or anything in the record which says otherwise.
But I mean, I understand that the appellant was operating pro se, but I don't see an issue about allowing an amendment.
I agree with you. I don't think the amendment is appropriate here. I think it's important to remember that as to the majority of the statements, they are time barred. So even if he was permitted to amend yet another time and say the statement I was just referring to, he alleges then something with specificity, you know, this person said exactly this statement, it would still be time barred.
You keep focusing on the defamation claims, and again, I'm concerned the judge seemed to have lumped everything together, including what might otherwise be independent torts unrelated to any defamatory comments.
So the trial court appropriately did that under the single action rule, which has been litigated a lot in Florida, Your Honor. And that makes clear that where there are other ancillary claims that are based on the same core facts, the same speech, it could be the same publication, it could be a combination of them, they're appropriately dismissed. There's no independent facts here that would allow, for example, the IIED claim to stand or the tortious interference claim to stand. And so
let me break this down. So let's assume we have a banter on the radio. The DJ is a cokehead. Okay. You're claiming that's probably protected. And over here, I have this other scheme to make sure the guy never works in the industry again. You're telling me those are all part and parcel?
here it's alleged, and I heard my counsel use the word campaign. It's alleged that a number of statements were made not only by appellees, but by third parties who have no affiliation with them, and those.
So that's your problem. I guess what you're pointing out to, you can't tell who's involved in this campaign.
Well, according to the exhibits in the complaint, you can see an identity of a number of third parties. I'm not saying there is a campaign, I'm
I
saying,
understand it, but you're not sure whether your two clients are the miscreants in this undertaking.
well, I think it's important to remember the context here. And as Judge said in the direct, this was a banter. It's the context of DJs. And yes, they insult each other. You can see exhibits to the complaint. You have Mr. Mishayev himself engaging.
Let's set that aside. I'd like to focus on, Judge Lewis hit the nail on the head with the question that concerned me. The other allegation that you can see clearly in the complaint that there was a concerted effort to basically destroy him from having ever had a career. That part, forget the banter. And he alleged, if you look at the complaint, he alleged a lot of things about here's what has been said, here's what's been done. Not just said for definite, this is what's been done. This is what's been done in order to stop him. Almost like a scheme to destroy him. And what I'm concerned is this is all the judge considered all that together versus looking, I mean, you're talking, there's a stated cause of action. And yes, for anti-SLAPP, you need to look more as to what's there, but there's more than just anti-SLAPP here. There's other allegations in the complaint, and I don't know if the judge had the opportunity to look at that versus focusing so much on the anti-SLAPP that kind of lumped all of that together. So help me out with that.
So I think, Your Honor, if I may, I think what you're asking is more about the actual malice. And can you look at everything in the complaint to say he's alleged actual malice is, I think, what Your Honor is
Not just
asking.
that, I mean, allegations of an assault, allegations of other things. So it's not just all together one thing. There's a lot in here. And so this is what I'm concerned with. So I'll give you an opportunity just to guide me and to help me as to why that concern should not be valid.
And I think the trial court did a nice job of sort of walking through the steps of actually piecemealing it out. So she makes the determination that the anti-SLAPP applies, as shown by Beasley through the various allegations in the complaint, honing in specifically to say all of the action was done by Mr. Davis in his capacity as a high-level manager in connection with his radio show, in his, quote, role/character as an employee of Beasley. So we have that issue of, did Beasley meet its burden? So starting with the anti-SLAPP. Moving then to Your Honor's question about what do I do about the other ancillary claims with the assault and all of that? You look at the facts. What are the facts alleged that are forming the basis for each cause of action? And the facts alleged, he adopts each fact into every count. And the facts are statements that were made, either in person, everything is related to the radio show. It's in connection with it because it's Mr. Davis's role as the program director on WilD 94.1. So it's statements that were made that are then incorporated into every count. And under this,
Well, how about, let's put it in the context of the alleged assault. Is he there in his capacity as a program manager, the DJ for WilD?
so according to the allegations in the complaint, it's all related to his position as a program director on WilD 94.1. But taking that incident in particular, we have a couple of issues with that. Number one is words can never constitute a claim for assault. So substantively, that claim would fail regardless if you have the single action rule. And we've briefed that in our motion to dismiss and again on this appeal. And there's, that's an intentional unlawful threat, an ability to carry out the threat. Words don't constitute an assault, and it's clear that no violence was imminent. So there's cases that...
Just as you've given us these common law elements, it still strikes me that is divorced from anything that is broadcast on the radio.
So the statute construes, it says it in connection with radio. So I would argue that his position as the radio director and as alleged in the complaint is in connection. But regardless of whether...
Well, I'm just having trouble picturing this encounter in Ybor City with these two guys who happen to come in connection with each other. If I read the complaint generously, there's a tussle. And this all goes back to an allegation in 2011 that the appellant is a drug user. I have a real disconnect. You got to help me with that.
So the assault, taking the assault claim, to answer your Honor's question, I think there's a number of things. Number one, he alleges that statements were made. Those statements are not actionable because words don't constitute assault. They also there's no actual malice alleged in connection with those statements. And it's not defamatory, it's an opinion, right? It's just saying, I'll never hire someone like you. It's just sort of vague figurative language. And importantly, he also alleges that the statements were made to him directly, meaning Mr. Davis said them to Mr. Mishayev directly, so we failed the third-party publication element of the defamation tort. So we have a number of underlying layers there, which I understand Your Honor's question about that, because there are a number of reasons why that claim fails, specifically on its own and in connection with the single action rule, the defamation of what was actually said and who it was said to. So either way, that cause of action fails, whether you would like to consider that anti-SLAPP, single action, or on its own substantively. So I think it's important to know, I know there's been some questions about, sort of this campaign, to use the word that my opposing counsel used. And a campaign isn't actionable under defamation law. He's brought defamation claims here in addition to these ancillary claims. And what's important in defamation is where you have a limited purpose public figure as alleged by Mr. Mishayev himself.
Let me ask you this, because I want to make sure I have time to respond to my question. Counsel alleged, you're taking the position your client is a public figure, he's a public personality, and so forth. How about the comment that he was using social media, it's personal social media, not under the Beasley, or the actual broadcasting network, but a lot of the things that he did was personally, and for lack of better, not a campaign, but this was a concerted effort to try to ruin his life, for lack of a better word.
I think Your Honor asked a couple of questions. The actual malice limited purpose public figure standard looks at the plaintiff. So what Mr. Mishayev was doing in connection with the public controversy, right? Thrusting himself into these conversations, commenting. We have some examples where he's engaging with third parties of someone named DJ Casper, where Mishayev is messaging him and insulting him and saying, I'm going to fight you, come at me, those type of banter back and forth. That's as far as the limited purpose public figure. I think Your Honor also asked about, what about Mr. Davis? And if you look at the post, as well as the video that Mr. Mishayev put in the record, which is that radio promo rap where he's in studio, you see the microphone with WilD 94.1. Everything that Mr. Davis is posting is in his capacity as his radio personality, Orlando Davis. He's promoting the radio show. So he talks about what's coming next. You can see some of the comments are about the show. It's not him personally. Even if it was him personally, again, the statements that were made in context are not defamatory. They can't be proven true or false. There's a litany of cases that talk about where someone called another person a crook, a scam artist, can't make it in an industry, even, more inflammatory words, racist words. Those things have all been held to be not objectively falsifiable. You can't prove them true or false. Taking out all of the statements that are time barred, all of the statements that weren't made by appellees, that were made by third parties or alleged to be made by third parties, you basically have the on-air promo rap where he, in the middle of it, says the reason DJ Shorty ain't made it. As we heard from counsel, they're contending that's not defamatory, and I agree with them. That's opinion. And then you have some similar back and forth jabs about not making it in the industry. So none of that rises to actionable defamation.
But what it seems to cover is, I get the impression that the appellant came to Florida, wanted to hook on to Mr. Davis. And Mr. Davis didn't seem to want to have anything to do with him for whatever reason. Is that fair?
I don't know
where I go with that, but for whatever reason, any desire that the appellant had to work with Mr. Davis was just not going to happen.
Right, and there's a variety of reasons that someone doesn't get hired, whether by an individual or a company. Whether, I think what you're asking is, should Mr. Davis have given him a chance in the industry? I can't speak to that. I mean, there's some
Well, I'm
allegations.
not saying he's entitled to a chance, but, you know, I'm just trying to understand what's at the root of all of this.
Well, I think too, I know we've gone back to actual malice a couple of times here, that actual malice is a subjective inquiry. It's whether someone either had a subjective awareness of probable falsity or reckless disregard for the truth or falsity of statements. So there's no allegation or facts whatsoever that Beasley or Mr. Davis had any sort of awareness of what anything that was said was false, right? And which makes sense.
Cocaine user, statement like he's a cocaine user. What is it, what's the term, culture vulture, whatever it is that was mentioned in there?
Culture vulture, that goes back to the time-barred statement, but
And
culture.
actually, what you had said about that bothered me, and that, let me finish, let you finish your statement, but I do want to go back to the statute of limitations issue.
Okay.
That's what statements are included.
Okay, so if you look at the chart that's actually in the record at 270, that has the number of statements that we could identify in the complaint, as well as each defense or basis for dismissal. And the statute of limitations goes through up to statement 12, and statement 12 is that wrap on the reason DJ Shorty ain't made it. So other than the statute of limitations, as far as 12 through 16, the remainder of the statements, you have a number of other issues. For example, there's a couple in there that talk about other people saying something to Mr. Mishayev, or other unknown third parties or people that are alleged in the complaint or in those exhibits to the complaint, that they just make statements, but they're not alleged to be by Beasley. So removing all of the statements that are barred by the 2-year statute of limitations and the statements not made by Beasley, all we have left is the reason DJ Shorty ain't made it, in a rap for the radio promo, and then a similar encounter that Your Honor asked about, which is just sort of, I won't hire people like you, just statements made to Mr. Mishayev. And even in the complaint, when they had that incident in person, the complaint alleges the conversation started by talking about this lawsuit. So the two of them are sort of engaged in a back and forth about the lawsuit, and then it's, just some sort of, banter and taunting back and forth of, I'm not going to hire people like you. So
There's a quote here, also paragraph 76, I just pulled it up. That had that incident happened in 2021. The allegation says, Mr. Davis became fully enraged and said, and I quote, I will slap the shit out of you, huge ass, close quote. That's there.
Right, so that statement, again, if we're talking about the assault specifically, mere words don't constitute an assault. There has to be an immediate threat, and there's cases that talk about brandishing a weapon.
It's whatever, is that person ready to carry out the threat, and what's alleged here, it says that, and then you went through the specific, I guess Mr. Shiller only weighs, and I'm reading 74, 150 pounds. While Mr. Davis weighs close to 300 pounds. So the allegations is there, the allegations that he's being out of control, the allegation that he made that statement that I will slap the whatever I do. So all of those things, so it's not just mere words, there's allegations that he's able to carry out that threat.
So in the cases, and there's one, Buschetti versus.
I would like you to answer the question, but you're out of time. So decide, and you had a question, you had to follow up, right?
I did.
Please answer Judge Kazan's question, and then
Thank
we'll allow Judge Ross and you to come to question.
Will do. Thank you for the extra time. To answer your question, there are cases, for example, the Buschetti versus Landon case in the 3rd DCA that, and a number of others that say that where there's no weapon or no immediate, it has to be more than that. So if there's no weapon or no physical touching, there can't be an assault. So we don't know here, just to, as a hypothetical, we don't know how far apart they were. They could have been 3 parking spaces away and he's yelling from the other side of the parking lot. What has been alleged is not enough for an assault under the cases. There's no immediate threat.
Going back to the statements in paragraphs 24 and 81, you said that those were not alleged in the original complaint, but why wouldn't they relate back?
So in defamation, there's a single publication rule where as soon as it said the 2 years starts ticking, if you will. And so it wasn't alleged in the original complaint, and it's pretty strictly construed that it has to be alleged, or I'm sorry, the claim has to be brought within the 2 years. So
The
those
defamation claim was brought within 2 years, but the specific facts weren't necessarily alleged in the original complaint.
those statements were not. And the only thing brought in the original complaint was the ain't made it and the tortious interference claim. And then a couple of years later, he brought the first amended complaint. So there's cases that discuss that there's no relation back as far as actual statements are made. It's different than.
Specifically for defamation cases?
Yes. And so, and even in this instance, where you're talking about the paragraph about the, the one that could be in, or the vague one that could be in within the statute of limitations, that again was a statement that appeared to be made by a third party to Mr. Mishayev or Mr. Mishayev's agent, not by appellees. And there's
For 24, it said, based on information and belief, Mr. Davis and Beasley employees contacted YouTube, Google directly.
And there's cases that say for defamation, because there's a particularity standard when it comes to alleging statements on information and belief is not sufficient.
So and then we go back to why couldn't he just have an opportunity to amend?
Well, as the majority of them, they're outside the statute of limitations, but here, amendment, he did have an opportunity to amend, and he hasn't alleged any actual malice as well. So it's our contention that amendment would be futile here and would be prejudicial to the appellees. So we ask that your honors please affirm the dismissal. If I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jackson, rebuttal?
Thank you.
Just for the record. Thank you, Your Honors. I wanted to get into the public figure issue. I think that's something that the court needed to delve into before making this decision. When it comes to public figures, you have to show that they assume the roles of special prominence in the affairs of society and the resolution of the public question. The court, when analyzing whether or not a person is a public figure, you have to look at the access to media and their opportunity, what was going on. Secondly, the issue about pure opinion. Right? When we talk about pure opinion, the facts have to be part of that publication as to why you have that opinion. Saying someone is a cocaine user, for instance, without explaining, well, I was out with, the appellant and he went to the restroom and he was using cocaine. All we have is a conclusion. The listener cannot be left to guess or to determine how they came to
But
that.
I have to consider the listener in the context.
Mhm.
And this is, I guess the trial court found there's evidence that there's a lot of nasty banter going on in the rap scene with the DJs. And no reasonable person would necessarily believe that anybody's a cokehead or a drug user or whatever. It's just the usual give and take that we see in this industry.
Well, Your Honor, I respectfully disagree. And I would say also, the complaint doesn't allege anything about banter. The other side doesn't have any evidence about banter. And then one other thing. If a statement can be looked at, let me read it right here. If the publication is susceptible to two reasonable interpretations, one which is defamatory, the issue where the publication was defamatory becomes one of fact and must be submitted to the jury. So I think that would apply there. Whether, with the audience, is it a matter of law? Well, this audience looks at something a particular way. Like, for instance, carpetbagger. Is that defamatory? Well, it depends. That's the same thing with culture vulture, a racist, a Trump supporter. It depends on who the audience is. But particularly with the cocaine use, if you were to say that to anyone, there's two interpretations. I understand the court is saying, well, with amongst DJs, that's not defamatory. Well,
Well, I'm not just saying the DJs, I'm suggesting that to the audience of this particular genre, it would not necessarily have a defamatory impact.
yeah,
And I know you don't.
Yeah, I don't, because, I don't see this any different than, for instance, a rapper being called a murderer. You can make the argument, well, in the rap industry, being a murderer or a person that abuses women and calls them, or adulterer or a fornicator or something is not looked at in a bad sense. But I don't think so. I think that's something for the jury, so whether or not that audience would look at it that way. I don't think there's any kind of evidence of that. And I think Judge Rothstein might have mentioned what I was going about relate back. If we go back to his original complaint, he does allege defamation, does talk about cocaine user, I believe. And another thing too about the specificity, I want to go from Cousins versus Post, Newsweek Stations, Florida, that's out of the 3rd DCA. It says, in other words, a pleader need only state the essence of what the alleged defamer said. There's no specificity requirement. This is not a fraud case where it requires the pleader to ferry out its evidence. I think if it might have been the Beard case or in the Baskin case where that issue came up in oral argument about, well, spelling out all your evidence. There's no need to do all that when it comes to pleading, just short and plain statements that conveys the idea. And I wanted to touch one more thing on the drug pusher. There was a case, my computer crashed, so I can't remember the case.
So you never should defend on these things.
So we had the drug pusher case. In that case, I wanted to distinguish it because it's in the order, where it references a case about being a drug pusher. In that case, the court, I believe it's Pullum versus Johnson, and that's out of the 1st DCA. In that case, it was, the court looked at the whole broadcast, and in the broadcast, he was likening alcohol to a drug pusher. So he was calling alcohol drugs and saying, because it was an issue about an ordinance coming up of whether or not the county was going to be a wet county versus a dry county, and this person was a minister, and they were just using that kind of banter words. So, it goes, and then it also goes to the issue of the public issue. What was the public issue here? What is the issue of public concern? There's nothing, my client is not dealing with anything before government or any kind of issue of concern. All right, thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Thank you both. Interesting case at all.